Hello and welcome to the Feynman Factor. Today my guest is Doug Johnson, who is a professor of piano and he's also a certified body mapping teacher at Berklee College of Music in Boston. Thanks for joining me today.
A pleasure. Good morning.
Good morning, good evening. We are in different time zones. Um, so I want to talk about um, the main thing that you do as an educator. I think there are two main things. You teach music and you also teach body mapping. So I would be really happy to see how you've developed new methods of perhaps putting these together for musicians.
That would be great. Um, it's interesting. Once I started really clearly doing this work, where you could say where in terms of piano, I'm a professor of piano at Berklee College. So I had a piano student, and there are a lot of very specific things that I learned from my piano teacher, whose name is Burton Hathaway.
Mm.
That are rather more specific than uh, a lot of the way piano is taught, and he was the one who really started me down this road of body mapping, which has to do with clearly learning the structure of the moving parts that are relevant. So learning how the forearm rotates and the two bones in the forearm, et cetera, a lot of things like that.
Mm.
Uh, so so I was beginning to more and more very clearly teach my students that way. And I remember having one student who I worked with actually I met him because he had chronic pain and we worked through that and he was feeling great. And when he finished up, he said, I don't even, how do you even teach piano without doing these things, without talking
Wow.
about it? And that's really how I feel at this point. It's like how would you teach harmony without talking at some point about intervals and chords and inversions and relationships between chords
Yeah.
and all that. Those are the essential elements of harmony, and in the same way, the essential elements of movement, and especially such specific movement that involves something like playing the piano or the violin. The elements of the movement include the stuff that's moving, and if it's some point we aren't aware of that or don't teach that, something's missing.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't mean to say that everybody needs to learn every little detail. But as a teacher, it's incredibly useful to have the tools to understand why somebody with the same basic instruction might be having difficulty while another one just goes off and does fine.
Mm. Um, well, I think what you're saying reminds me of, I suppose maybe it's not sort of clear to society most of the time, but we always hear about when it goes wrong is that the teacher was put in a place of being in charge of the education of the student, and they didn't do well, and they disappointed the society regardless of their job. And I think one of the uh, jobs of the educator is to help the student prevent the possibility of the injury. Um, and I'm wondering if teaching piano to someone who is just doing fine, and if the teacher notices that they could be, I suppose, understanding the elements of the mechanics that go into the movement better to prevent the possibility, then that teacher is doing the best they can, but not perhaps the best job by the student. Does that make
Hmm.
sense what I'm saying? That
Not entirely, but I just maybe I'll respond and see if I followed. Um, there, one thing that at least that came to mind as you were saying that is that ultimately the same thing that gets rid of pain or prevents pain is the very thing that allows the person the freedom to play better and better and better. A
Hmm.
statement that I like, if someone we are sort of a little bit starting from the place of talking about pain and prevention and health, but that getting rid of pain isn't the end; it's the beginning.
Oh
And
yeah.
often times, you've had this experience. People come to you because they're experiencing. They're not just coming out of curiosity. They're coming because they need some help and
Hmm.
they're having some pain. And usually the desire is to get rid of this problem so then I don't have to think about all this stuff anymore. And and obviously in Alexander technique and in body mapping and these different somatic disciplines and uh, Buddhism and all, meditation, all these related things, they all relate to awareness and the idea that you become aware so you can get rid of pain so you don't have to be aware anymore. When you put it like that, it sounds kind of silly. but that is such a normal desire to not have to think about this stuff. But when people find out that that having a heightened clear awareness is also going to be the thing that helps them improve. And everybody, more than anything, musicians, we want to play better. We want to get better. So when people that are doing fine in the sense that they're not having any discomfort or anything, but there's always ways that people can improve.
Hmm.
And when they realize it's the same body of information, the same essential process that's going to help them down that path, which is really the same path, then that's wonderful. Although sometimes um, having people realize that, getting people to realize that is not necessarily an easy thing. It's not, people need to be ready. That's at my age at this point teaching. I've been at Berkeley for 15 years, and I understand so much better that people need to be ready. When I
Yeah.
started off, I sort of wanted to teach. I think it's a very normal beginning teacher thing is you want to teach everybody everything you know in the first couple of weeks, and and then over time you realize, well, when this person's ready to take this next step, they'll let me know. I can put it out there and let them know that there's this possibility, there's this path that we could go down, but when they're ready, we can do that.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's still hard to be patient, but
Yeah, I suppose the main thing that we're teaching is patience and awareness. So,
yeah,
um, getting that curiosity to almost the mechanism of curiosity, as it were, getting that mechanism of getting the learner to be interested in, well, how else can I do that? Is a huge part of the whole process, isn't it? Um,
absolutely. Curiosity is, I in a way, I feel like that's the main thing I really teach or try to model and try to encourage people um, to really live.
hmm. Hmm. Um,
It's surprising how not everybody um, really takes full responsibility for their own learning. Of course, there, there's some people that show up and they say, "There's this thing that I've really wanted to learn, and these are all the things I've done to try to figure it out."
right.
And other people might just say, "Yeah, I'd like to be able to play the piano. That'd be nice." it's a pretty wide range in between those two things.
That would be nice. So if I pay the money here and sign up, no. Um, yeah, I mean, and then that it could be that person who, has this kind of like, yeah, it'd be nice to play piano. Maybe it'll happen, maybe not. Maybe their curiosity is not directed through the right path. Maybe they'll do better, um, in photography, for example. Who knows? I mean, there's also that range that not everyone who's doing music um, is there to by their own um, by their own volition. Some people are there because they just didn't get end up doing something else. And then I suppose you sometimes get a room of people. I don't know. My guess is that you teach ensembles and groups as well.
Actually, no ensembles at Berkeley right now. It's private lessons, and then I
Okay.
teach I teach a body mapping class and a rhythmic studies class.
Okay. So I'd like to pick your brain more about the body mapping and how you go teaching a group, um, and how you activate that exchange of curiosity. What kind of tools, what kind of general tools um, you've experienced that work and some that don't don't work so well, assuming that they're getting graded for this
Yeah, great.
class. So there's also that aspect, they're sitting there saying, well, I need to feel those credits.
Yeah, the, the the thing that I think is most useful, and certainly this isn't an original discovery, whenever possible, if someone can have an experience that's interesting and surprising, and then you follow the inquiry from the experience,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to giving some information and then say, isn't that interesting, from the abstract. So the more people can have an experience, whether it's about balance or plenty of things that are surprising about how our bodies are structured compared to the way we assume it's structured or think it's structured.
Mm.
And when somebody's presented experientially with that dissonance between their preconceptions and what they find out is actually happening in their body, then most people wake up and are surprised. And when you have that that genuine surprise, there's curiosity as part of it, and that's a nice place to go from whenever possible. And in a related way, when I do presentations for other kind of groups other than classes, I like to have a lot of images. Excuse me. Images that are surprising and interesting. I just did a presentation recently, and I had on the legs, structure of the legs, and I had a bunch of X-rays that were really wonderful and clear. And one of the things that's very striking to people, and I got to say, they're striking to me every time I see them. They surprise me, even though it's nice, because even though you can say what the surprising things are, when the image comes before you, it just pops. So there's a surprising amount of space between the femur and the tibia, and obviously there is some stuff filling up that space, but the basic idea that we have on some level, that a bone is supposed to push on another bone, and that's what a joint is. When you see this huge space between those two bones, it makes you really wonder. And also the kneecap, there's a side view of the knee, and the kneecap isn't just kind of right over where the joint is, much higher, and once again, there's quite a lot of space between the femur and the patella, the kneecap. So it was presenting to people that know this stuff, but still, it was nice because the pictures were still surprising and made the information that they knew again, and that really awakened the experience for everyone, I think.
For example, the experience of standing or walking, it's very different when you realize that it's not two bones sitting on top of each other or just in front. It's there's the elasticity and the space, as you say, between the bones. That makes a different experience of walking.
Yes. Yeah, if you can take that image, which is in the body mapping organization, we make a distinction about teaching with imagery
Mm-hmm.
versus teaching the facts. But the nice thing about this is an image. It's literally an image that's on the screen. That's an X-ray. But that imagery is reflecting reality. So you hold that image, and then if you can experience something that's more closely in line with that image, it's a really, as you said, it's a very different experience of standing and walking.
Sure,
So there's a quote I want to share with you. You were talking about. I always. Another great scientist, Noam Chomsky.
Yes.
Who, the linguist and intellectual and political activist, he says that the willingness to be puzzled by things that seem simple and obvious is what opens the door to deep questions and learning. The last part is a little not exact, but I love that. So the willingness to be puzzled, and that kind of goes to the idea of teaching curiosity. It's like, what is it that makes that music work? What is it that makes the music great, or that pianist get a great sound, or be able to play with a huge dynamic range? What is it that makes that possible? And the willingness to just question that directly with that kind of beginner's mind is so helpful. But there's this part, the willingness to be puzzled by things that seem simple and obvious. That takes it to a different place, because it's one thing to be puzzled by things like the meaning of life, but if you're willing to be puzzled by things that seem so obvious, like playing loud or soft on the piano, everybody knows how that works, but most people don't really have a sense of the mechanism involved in how that works, and people assume they know what their thumb is. What could be more simple and obvious? But your thumb is twice as long as it appears, and when you make that leap, or you go to that place where you're willing to question these fundamental things, then as Chomsky said, that's when those are the questions that open the door to really keep learning.
Yeah,
and it's always available.
Yes, it's the obvious things, like you're talking about. It's good to question what the meaning of life is, but I learned English when I was 11, so I'm still get curious about finding out what the actual words mean.
Yes.
So look up the definitions for what's meaning. Yeah, it's a language, and how we perceive language has got so many clues to help in teaching. So I want to know more about some. I don't know much about it, but on your website, it was a news from a couple of years ago that you did some research with the physiotherapy department is it University of Florida?
University of South Florida.
And you were able to
I gotta
present these findings at the PAMA, which is the Performing Arts Medicine Association.
Yes. Yeah, that's been a fascinating journey. A few years ago, I was fortunate to receive a grant from Berkeley Comics Faculty Fellowship grant, which is a pretty substantial amount that allowed me to collaborate with a physical therapist at the University of South Florida, who's a professor and has a lot of experience with research. And I had some ideas about what I wanted to explore, and the initial things didn't really lead anywhere in terms of being able, at least in terms of being able to measure the results. Yeah. But where we ended up was a really clear sense of how the function of the hand and the state or the quality of alertness in the hand has a direct relationship between core stability and balance and support.
Oh, yeah.
which is a pretty fascinating thing.
Mm.
And partly the preliminary findings we did present at PAMA last summer,
Hmm.
and we just did some final data analysis recently, and we're working to publish and things. But there's some things that show this relationship um, um, very clearly between what's happening with the hand and balance. So yeah,
Hmm.
my colleague, by the way, is Professor Dustin Hardwick, who's the professor down at University of South Florida, and it's been really interesting doing this work because I've had these ideas of research that I wanted to do, but I don't have training as a researcher, and so to be able to collaborate with this expert and follow this path has been really fun and interesting.
That's wonderful. And so it still continues. So the publication hasn't happened yet.
No, and we're doing some. We're talking about how to follow up with these results and where to go with it. So it's exciting, but
Hmm.
it all relates to really a path that my piano teacher, sent me down,
Hmm.
started me down. But this process I developed, which I call kinematic integration, which is influenced by a number of things, including Alexander technique, but really a fundamental aspect is um, like Alexander technique, finding things to trigger a full body, could call it a postural response, but a full body activation
Mm.
that is something or man's supreme inheritance, as Alexander said. We children all have this kind of
Hmm.
automatic fullness of purpose and full body activation and participation in whatever we do, and we tend to lose that. And Alexander definitely found that and understood that very well. But I believe that there are a number of different ways of triggering that same essential response.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
frankly,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
there's some ways that are much easier to find than thinking forward and up.
Oh, well,
Um,
yeah. Well, thinking forward and up, my understanding is at this point in my research and career teaching is that it's a byproduct. And
I like that.
Alexander,
I tend to.
well, that's because that's how physics works. As my understanding, I'm not a body mapping certified trainer, but my understanding of body mapping, I could be wrong, is that it's based on how the ground force reaction and gravity meet the main joints of the skeleton. That's where the education starts. Is that kind of in the ballpark?
Um, Perhaps. I mean, my understanding of the essential piece is that our the term body map refers to something that can also be termed, it's more scientifically body schema people
Mm-hmm.
refer to, but it's the sense that we have an internal representation of our body. So
Mm-hmm.
if somebody mentions your neck or your thumb or your elbow, immediately you have a picture of that structure in your mind. And the really important thing is that, and relevant thing is, those pictures that we have don't are rarely clear and accurate. Sometimes they're fuzzy, sometimes they're clear and completely wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and that we move according to those pictures. And Barbara Conable um, had that realization as a really great Alexander technique teacher, that why do people have all this information and have a lesson and move well, and then they go to work on the stuff and they come back all messed up. And
Hmm.
for instance, if you think if you have a sense that your head is resting on your spine in a different place than it's actually resting on your spine, if you try to release your neck and allow your head to be free, then you're gonna be creating a different scenario than your anatomy actually allows for. That's I didn't say that very clearly. You're going to be forcing your body to move in a way in a different way than it's actually structured. And so there'll always be this dissonance. And she found that when she taught people this, along with the Alexander lessons, the basic structure,
Mm-hmm.
their basic structure, and they could sense it and perceive it and understand it all together, then they learned much more efficiently. And then she began working with musicians and it became a separate thing where it's not generally hands-on and
Yeah.
it's mainly a dialogue and education.
Yeah. Yeah.
And interesting, I came to a very similar place from my teacher. So I
Hmm.
had the pleasure of finding this organization after I had done a lot of work on my own, and I actually am a registered nurse. Did that for a little while. That's a whole other story, but I mean, a lot of anatomy training with that, Tai Chi and Alexander technique. And so it was interesting finding a group that was doing basically what I would describe that I was doing, but coming from a different background and getting to know these people, and it's been really extraordinary. The group is called Andover Educators, by the way.
Yes. Yes. That's right.
That does body.
And their publications are very useful and fantastic, and I've used some of it in my teaching. And getting back to the hand and the mechanism of the torso, um, Alexander's view was that the mechanism of the torso is something that structured through how we think that mechanism works, which is exactly how you've been expressing the idea that if we have a image of our hand or our thumb or our wrist that's not in line with how that part might be actually structured, we're going to use it in accordance to what we think it's like. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're talking about, that dissonance that happens between um, how we actually use the thumb and how we can use the thumb according to its structure, which is usually makes it um, more efficient in sense of movement. Um, my sense is that what most Alexander teachers talk about, and I suppose Barbara Conable and her husband were of the same view, is that when you tell someone to take their head forward and up, when forward and up aren't really clear, it becomes something
Yeah.
that they force onto their system. So then
And when is it really clear?
I'm sorry. Well, the
I said
forward.
it. And when is it really clear?
Well, when
Those are tricky directions.
they're very tricky directions, and Alexander himself writes to that effect. And so the way I teach Alexander technique uses anatomical levers and lines between the levers to give the student a real perception of what it is that they're doing when they're using the full length of the mechanism of the torso, which, as we know, are the bones between the sit bones and the top of the shoulder, and how they can guide themselves to lengthen the spine and widen the back in a way that allows the hand to work more efficiently. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's the basis of the lessons, is that, as Alexander rightfully deducted about motor learning trying to affect the limbs and the functioning of the hands separately than affecting the functioning of the central control mechanism is always going to lead to doing a set of exercises that need to be done till the end of the time. whereas
Mm-hmm.
affecting knowing how to coordinate and create coordinated support, which in body mapping language would translate into balance, allows the learner to continuously refine how they can create, I suppose, a better use of their limbs without having to
Absolutely.
micromanage the limbs. So I don't know if I've gone way out into the left field with that.
No, it's great. One of the things that was we just had a conference recently, and one of the things that was being discussed is words that that we use to describe things, particularly the term weight delivery, which implies the forces of gravity working all compiling in one direct line going straight down to the ground. And Melanie Seaver suggested that perhaps a better terminology would be load distribution, which has a lot in common, but it includes, in addition to weight, it includes the inertial forces that we have when we're moving and stopping that we're dealing with. And it also, it allows for a way of understanding an experience that we tend to, if we've had a excellent Alexander technique lesson, we feel different than we did before it started. And one of the experiences we have is this remarkable feeling of weightlessness. And so simply thinking about weight, dead weight being delivered straight through the system down to the ground isn't really what the experience that we're experiencing. There's this experience that we're experiencing. It's not the experience. We're experiencing something a bit more magical in this weightlessness. And what I really have been remiss to mention at this point is the idea of tensegrity, which to me is a concept that's central to everything I think about now. The idea of that the understanding that there's a type of structure called a tensegrity structure that's fundamentally different than a compression structure like a stack of bricks, where one brick is pressing down on the next all the way down to the ground. And if we think about weight delivery, it's very easy to think about our body as a stack of bricks, with our head being on bricks, which are all the vertebrae all the way down to the ground. But instead, we have a system where there's a network of tensional, but basically wires or strings that are continuous, that are separated and held apart by sticks, but none of the sticks are touching one another. And it's hard to see just from a description, but somebody can find it by looking up tensegrity. And there's the idea of understanding the body, living structures that way, which is biotensegrity. Dr. Stephen Levin was the one who created this idea, trying to understand how a dinosaur neck functioned, which didn't really make any sense how something so massive could be supported. And so when you see a tensegrity structure, you see lines moving in many directions, force vectors. And the thing is, all these lines are forces made visible, which and when you look at fascia, the connective tissue in the body, you can see these lines of force made visible that are moving in all directions through the body. And when we can't experience that. And once again, it's an image. But when we experience the force distributed through the entire system in all directions, ultimately, yes, supported by the ultimate support on the ground, then we have this buoyancy and this expansion and the widening of the back that Alexander talked about. But we have this expansion equally in all directions. And that model and the images supplied by that model just coincide directly with the experience of it. And I think our job is, and certainly the way I conceive of kinematic integration, is finding ways to fully activate that system, to trigger that system. And once it's triggered, you tend to be good. You don't, it's like a light switch. You don't have to keep turning it on over and over again. If the lights are on, they're on. And then you can be aware of what are the things that tend to shut it off. And
Right. Yeah.
the process is pretty reliable. And Alexander was a genius, no doubt, and was aware of ways to turn the system on and how our
Hmm.
thoughts are central to that, and and how our thoughts can shut it off too and create the downward pull, which is, I think, the downward pull is basically weight delivery versus load distribution, which is something that would be not just unidirectionally straight down to the ground, but all over in all directions, which allows for movement and freedom and
Yes.
us to arrange ourselves in every position. One of the challenges I find with Alexander technique, and once again, please understand I'm a huge fan and learned a lot, but it's so easy to have a sense of that you're supposed to be in a particular position. And how do you understand curling and being in a ball and all these different organizations that can work?
Well, yeah, that's
If
exactly. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm in total
if
agreement with you because
it's possible to direct in all these different organizations, but students don't usually have a sense of that. I'm sorry to cut you off.
oh no, that's okay. I think we're in absolute agreement is that the directions that Alexander teachers nowadays, um, some people call it the modern Alexander technique, that are employed don't actually make physical physical sense. And by physical, I think I'm referring to the same thing you're talking about, as in the load distribution. As in,
Mm-hmm.
is that line going vertically? I said lengthen the spine. Is it lengthened? Is it lengthened? um, so to use this geometry of mechanical advantage rather than a position of mechanical advantage, with Alexander went. I could feel his anger translator going blue in the face, saying, "I don't by position. I don't mean a fixed thing." He says it over
Yeah.
and over again. Um,
Yeah.
but he was always open to people after him understanding his writing, which is full of motions. His writing is full of motion. A lot of people think his writing is difficult to
So glad to
understand.
hear you
I'm sorry?
appreciate, and I'm so glad to hear how much you enjoy his writing. I one
Yeah.
thing I found frustrated, at times I feel like I've moved in the direction I've moved directly in reaction to my frustration with some things about Alexander technique. Yet
Yes.
I appreciate it so much, and I really have learned to appreciate his writing so much. And sometimes well, actually, a number of times I've heard Alexander technique teachers talk pretty disparagingly about his writing, and
I know that. And that's not very true to form, I think, because um, it's
it's
like me.
frustrating. And
It's like a composer saying, "Hey, I'm kind of cool with some of Mozart, but yeah, I'm just not gonna dig how Beethoven dealt with Haydn. I can't dig it. Come on, you got it's something to expand your attention about." Um,
yeah,
what what
and
I what I'm
sorry,
what I'm really
I get it.
interested in that we both agree on is that what we're training is curiosity, and what we're training is attention. And what
Hmm.
I think with the genius of Alexander, whether it was all his or he was also studying other people's methods, is besides the point. What we can do today to make that available to more people is that it's simply asking a question: what do I want? And is what I'm doing in line with what I want? In the way Noam Chomsky meant it,
Hmm.
as
Beautiful.
in, what do I got with my ability to execute uh, this scale or this set of harmonies? How can I make it more easier, and how do I get there? And
Yeah.
Alexander was very, very, very clear in his introduction to his use of the self. that in a few lessons, not 52, he was very adamant that with the use of a teacher, in a few lessons, you be able to do away with people such as him. This was his words. If the teaching is correct, as in if we're teaching, all of us really, all somatic people who are interested in this, in the idea of enabling a person to teach themselves, if we're looking at the most simple aspect of it and have whatever means to get that across, whether it's the images of tensegrity or biotensegrity or geometry, if we can get what we want for the student to have to explore for a long time on their own in just a matter of 5 or 6 lessons, then I think it's something of extreme value for all of society, which goes back to what Alexander wanted. He didn't want people being able to afford, 120 lessons to feel good. That was the furthest thing from his mind. So I've
Well,
gone.
and it's also become a kind of a passive addiction. I mean, if you're
Oh
if you're
yeah,
dependent
oh
on
yeah.
if
I've
there's
seen
something
that.
to fix, it's not ideal.
Uh,
One of the things for me, a turning point. I actually feel inspired to get out one of his books and read again. It's been a while, but the turning point for me was my initial reaction was, gosh, this writing is very stiff and awkward and convoluted.
mhm.
And this is, I mean, a lot of people clearly have this reaction, but I at one point I decided to ask myself, well, okay, put your money where your mouth is. How would you say it different?
Mm.
And when I asked myself that question, I realized he's talking about things that no one else is talking about. And so there wasn't the language for it. And so the language was specific and I think necessarily awkward in ways because he was talking about things that no one else is talking about. And when I saw it in that light, I thought, my God, he's chosen the absolute perfect words to say exactly what he's intended to say. And from then on, that's when I started being like, how dare you speak that way about you're ultimate teacher. I'm not even part of this religion, but
It's not a
come on,
religion.
man.
It's not a religion. That he was absolutely clear about this.
I,
Yeah, he has the
but
Francis.
you're certified.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I was. But the people that are certified and are committed that way. That's all I mean. Yeah.
Yes. He was very. We should probably do another podcast or series on the writings of F.M. Alexander, but and how they differ from how Alexander teachers sort of throw their weight around or seem to want to do it. Some of them, at least. He was very adamant
Oh
that
yeah.
it's. He has the Francis Bacon quote at the beginning of the chapter where he's talking about the evolution of his technique, and he says, "This is not a religion, and it's not a cult, and it's probably not even a new idea." But I'm going to put my little sort of odyssey of the little journey across to the reader and let them find out for themselves.
It's treatments, which is also always interesting.
I'm sorry?
That it's not I'm sorry. It's that it's not a treatment.
Yes, I think that's
like a medical. Other fascinating elements.
Well, that's the thing, I suppose, that
Often,
it's a teacher. It's I suppose the art of teaching someone and finding out how to instigate what we were talking about at the beginning, which was instigate their curiosity and have them ask that question, what if? But what I'm wondering is how from being there for 15 years, what changes have you seen after setting up I'm reading that you were one of the founding people who set up the Berkeley Performance Wellness Institute. So what I want to, I graduated from Berkeley in 1994, and this was like a year
Oh, I
and
didn't.
a, and this was a year and a half after there was a there was a big uprising about the treatment of girls at Berkeley. Like if it was any different at Harvard, but there was um, there was a bit of hoopla, and this very very talented saxophonist. I forgot her name, but she is actually, I think, the staff jazz writer for the Globe. And so she went to the press and said, "I don't like the way those professors are treating women, and it's not right." And so everyone was having all the professors were having uh, meetings on how to treat human beings. So I wonder how it's come a long way after those years, and now we have even a performance wellness institute thanks to people like you. So give us a lowdown of that.
Well, we don't. That's actually evolved into something else at this point. But yeah, that was an interesting thing. Gosh, 8 years ago,
Uh-huh.
we had a faculty study group. Essentially, it's called a learning community. But we'd get together a couple every 2 weeks or so, and people from varying departments looking with a common interest in musicians' health.
Mm-hmm.
And how, in all aspects, and how to the issues that our students were having, the issues faculty were having, what could be done about it, how we could understand the problem and come up with solutions. And it was a great group, and we worked well together and very supportive. And at the end of we basically had like a culminating project we decided we wanted to do, which was do a survey of the students and see, now after being part of PAMA, the Performing Arts Medicine Association, I'm realizing a lot of people have done these surveys, and they're really important. And what we found out was between 70 and 80% of the students have had to stop playing for some period of time because of pain.
Wow.
And a significant portion of them end up with chronic problems, and it's like 30% of those end up with chronic problems, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's huge, huge numbers.
Yeah.
And it's something that was not being addressed. It wasn't being addressed, and the culture of Berkeley and everywhere else in conservatories is the last thing you want to do is tell somebody about it if you're in pain, because
of course,
then
it's the same in orchestras. The numbers and the culture is the same in orchestras.
Yeah, exactly. The numbers, what I found out over the years is the numbers are very consistent in all sorts of different styles and all music and all these things. At any rate, the numbers were significant enough that the administration said, "Oh my goodness, this is really something," and started this group called Performance Wellness Institute. And we existed for about 4 years, and Kenny Werner, who wrote a book called Effortless Mastery, which
I have that. Yes.
is wonderful and has a great positive impact on people all around the world. He was brought in to be the artistic director of the Performance Wellness Institute for the year, and the group has evolved into now being have a bit of a different mandate, but it was an evolution, and now it's the Effortless Mastery Institute, and Kenny leads that, and I'm a part of that, teaching body mapping, and we have Alexander Technique and Feldenkrais and yoga and Tai Chi as somatic disciplines connected to that. And what's also evolved from that is somebody can actually elect to it's just starting in the fall, elect to receive a minor emphasis in effortless mastery. So studying
fantastic.
Kenny's curriculum and all these, also some of these other somatic disciplines, which says a lot about how the school has evolved in this whole area. I mean, it's Kenny's focus is on getting into a space where you're free to play without your ego shutting you down,
Mm-hmm.
and free to respond in a genuine way. And I feel like I think we all feel like we do work going to that same place. I mean, it's certainly my goal in getting people to be more aware of their body is not so they can just be more aware of their body, and so they can
It's
get
a
rid
tool.
of,
Yeah, it's a tool.
let go of they've had, and it's the two things work, I think, in a beautifully complementary way.
Oh wow, that's wonderful. I did not know of its evolution. I might have heard something about the Kenny Werner Effortless Mastery Institute, but I didn't realize that it had sort of metamorphosized from the Berkeley Performance Wellness Institute. And that's kind of revolutionary how the situation around being able to minor in the somatic practices, I suppose, as applied to music. So it takes you back right to what your teacher was teaching you was how to support yourself playing music, which is not just financial, it's being able to support your body for the mechanism of using your hand for expression.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of cool, the full circle there. Uh, at least
Yeah,
that's
it
what it
really
seems
it
like.
really does say a lot. The commitment to this whole area from the school. It's
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
exciting.
That's great. And they're involved with Boston. Is it Boston University now? Is involved with that? The Boston Conservatory. Boston Conservatory is now involved in that.
Well, that's that's evolving.
Right.
The schools have merged, but they're still quite separate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm at the level of the president's office. They definitely are one large institution, but yeah, the schools are quite separate too. What always comes to mind is Hong Kong and China. My wife's from Hong Kong, so that's in mind. But one country, two systems. It's kind of like that. There's one large school, but they're two separate systems.
Right.
But I'm hoping very much to have, in particular, I would love to work with some classical musicians over at the conservatory, because I'm professionally now a jazz musician, but my training is definitely classical. I was a classical trombonist.
Oh, really? So is my
on
husband.
a career path.
Right.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, so my a lot of my heart is still with the whole orchestral musician process, and so I'm hoping to be able to work with some people that are playing chamber music and classical piano and all that.
That's great.
And certainly there's some at Berkeley, but obviously the conservatory is that's the focus.
Yes. Yes. Well, Doug, I feel like we need to get back together and talk about some more nuts and bolts. And is there
That would be
anything else?
great.
Is
This
there?
has been really fun.
Yeah, it's been fascinating, and I can't wait to actually listen back to it as well myself. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about before we finish this podcast?
Hmm. Oh, a bunch of things. If you have a question, get me going.
Well, it's be very exciting to perhaps do maybe a series of podcasts over maybe a course of a few months, and to focus it in on various questions. I suppose these days social media context are used for that, but it's been wonderful to have you, and I'm going to put a whole bunch of links how people can get in touch with you to find out more about the fascinating system that you're using for teaching musicians about efficiency and about taking care of themselves, really. Yeah, thanks for joining
Well, one
us.
thing
Yes, yes,
I'll mention,
yes, absolutely.
a project that I have right now, aside from the name Kinematic Integration is fairly new. It's about 6 months old, and a couple people have been encouraging me for a while to name this thing that I'm doing and these techniques. But when I was in Brazil in May, I started creating a series of piano instructional videos that really going into all this process related very specifically to playing the piano, and those are going to be coming out in about a month. So
Oh, fantastic.
if anybody might be, I would love just to let you know that those are coming out, and if you go to either one of my websites, you'll find that information as it's coming out.
Great. Well, I'll put that information below, and I assume they're being supported by Berkeley Press, or is it another?
No, this is my own project.
Oh, your own project. Fantastic. Okay, great. Yep. Well, look, I think we're going to have to do another one after that point, after the new videos come out. But thanks so much for joining me from Boston again, and for being on the Feynman Factor.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.